Okay, so this week was mixed ANOVA, and mixed ANOVA is a mix of between group and repeated measures variables. So in order to complete this, you need at least two independent variables for the design. And as we've talked about before, ANOVA is a linear model. So when you have three independent variables or predictors, we just add the third predictor to the linear model, and we remember to include interactions involving this new predictor when we analyze our results. So for my question this week, I was looking at OCB frequency, or on a rating scale of 1 to 100 of coworkers, and how likely one is to participate in OCB or help you. So those with greater experience will help more, and those who are nicer will help more. So experience and personality were my two variables. So we load that package used for ANOVA, this one for post hoc tests, this one for the multi-level model, this for descriptive statistics, this for reshaping the data, and this for robust tests. So I attached my data set up here. And so we need to put the data into the long format, so we create a new data frame, and the data frame contains 4 columns. So the first identifies the participant, the second identifies their gender, and the third identifies the name of the column that we're pulling the data from. So up here, all of our different groups. So these are our measured, these are the variables. And then the fourth will contain the rating of the participant. So we melt those together. And we're going to rename the columns of the data frame that I just talked about. So this is giving labels to that long formatted new data frame. So our variable groups in this is the mixture of the predictor variables. So my two predictor variables were experience and personality. And then from there, we are going to create the variable personality within the data frame. So we will specify whether the participant rated was nice, of average personality, or rude. And we want to indicate that we want 3 sets of 60 scores, and the label options gives the names to each of the 3 sets corresponding to those levels of personality. So we want 60 nice, 60 average, and 60 rude. So next we will create the experience variable in the data frame, and this specifies whether the participant rated had high perceived experience, some experience, or no experience. And we once again indicate that we want 3 sets of 20 scores, which will create 60 cases, which is 3 times 20, and 60 cases here, specified above. And that will create the codes for the first level of personality, which is nice, and then it'll be repeated for the remaining 2 levels of personality. Or for experience. So high, some, and none. So the new data frame oh, I can just open it from over here. Ha! Okay, so so this data frame shows that each participant has a value that indicates their gender, and then the 9 scores distinguished by the variables of experience and personality. So that's how we get the 180 entries for all the participants. So next we want to observe the descriptive statistics for the combined levels of gender, experience, and personality. So I'm going to run this, and the output will contain the descriptive statistics for each of the 9 conditions split according to whether participants were male or female. So we can look at these here. So female, 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 and then splits up into male. And the descriptive statistics show us the pattern of the means across all the experimental conditions, and we can observe the through interactions by graphing these means, which we will do later. And next, we're going to set the orthogonal contrasts, and so we have to create variables representing each contrast. So the 2 lowest levels of personality and experience are rude and none, respectively. So we're going to use these as our control. And the contrasts are going to compare some personality. So if they had nice or average level personality, since we're saying that rude is the control, to the rude personality. That's what this first one is. And then compare the nice personality with the average level of personality, so differentiating between these two that we had specified before. And for experience, we are going to create a contrast that compares some level experience. So if you have high level experience or some experience combined, the same thing. We want to bind each of these. So if you have higher average experience, and then we're going to compare that to no experience, and then the same thing. So we're going to split high and average or some experience to comparing it against each other, and then we will bind those. So that creates the variables that represent each contrast, and we'll bind them together and set them as a contrast for each personality, which is the first one, and then experience is the second one. So next we're going to create a new model for the ANOVA, and as we talked about before, you have to add the between group variable of gender. So we can use Easy ANOVA the same way that we've done in the past with repeated measures, but now we're adding the between group variable of gender using that between option right here. So we will indicate the data frame that we want to pull from, the outcome variable of the rating, the participant, the between group variable of gender, the repeated measures variable of experience and personality, and then indicate type 3 sum of squares, and the detailed output to include the sum of squares, so we have to set that to true. So then we're going to run the model to get the output for the ANOVA. So from the output, we can see the Mauchly's sphericity tests for each of the 3 repeated measures effects in the model, along with their interaction with gender. So we talked about how we have to break these down. And none of our effects violate the assumption of sphericity, because all of the values in the P column are greater than 0.05. So we can assume sphericity when we look at our F statistics later. The summary Mm. Oh, the summary is going to show the effect of the ANOVA. So all of this that we want to interpret, the F values, the P values here. So there are three main effects of our predictor variables, but three interaction effects involving two variables and then another interaction that includes all three variables. So talking about how they're broken up here. We find a non-significant effect of gender here, meaning if we ignore experience level and personality level of the data, male and female participants didn't differ in the ratings that they gave significantly. There is a significant effect of experience, which means it's hard to read that. I don't know why it's split like this. I tried to extend it, but so number 3 is experience here. So there was a significant effect of experience, which means that if we ignore whether an individual was nice and whether the rating was for a man or a woman, then the experience of a person significantly affected the ratings they received. And the experience times gender was not significant. Experience times gender, number 4 is down here, was not significant, meaning that although ratings were affected by whether the individual had high, average, or no experience, the way in which ratings were affected by experience did not differ in the male and female raters. And then there's a significant effect of personality. Personality is number 5, which means that if we ignore whether the individual had had experience and whether the rating was for a man or a woman, the personality of a person significantly affected the ratings that they received. And the personality times gender interaction isn't significant, so we know that personality didn't differ in male and female raters. And there is a significant interaction between experience and personality. We're actually looking at these values, but my cursor is lined up over here. So there's a significant interaction between experience and personality, and so that means that if we ignore gender, the ratings across different levels of experience was different for nice individuals, average personality individuals, and rude individuals. So the ratings across different levels of personality was different for people who had high levels of personality, if we want to talk about, or different levels of personality was different for people who had high experience and some experience and no experience. So those are basically just saying the opposite of each other, but the same thing. So next, we are going to graph the interaction plots. I'm going to switch around the order of these. I did this out of order, but I will switch it when I give it to you. So we have to library ggplot here. So this is going to be the interaction plot between experience and personality, which we already talked about these effects. So now we're going to be able to see them. So these are just the visual representations of the comparison of means for each group. So this is experience and personality. So for all levels of experience, we can see that the mean score for the nice personality was the highest, followed by average level of personality, and then rude personality. So as individuals gain more experience, they receive higher mean ratings. So people with the highest level of experience received the highest ratings, and then it decreased as they had less. So next we will do gender and experience. So this we can see for both genders as level of experience decreased, so did mean score, and very similarly They're basically the same line. Next, we will look at gender and personality. So for both genders, as people became more rude or had less desirable personality, their average score decreased, also very similarly to experience, as we saw. Both genders rated about the same for the means. And last, we will look at the interaction plot between experience, personality, and gender. So we can see that for both genders, as level of experience decreased, so did mean score. And as people became more rude or less nice, their mean score decreased. So nice was always the highest mean score, as we can see. And then followed by the average level, and then rude by the different colors. And the same thing can be said about experience level. They all followed that same shape. I am going to move this to where I want it. Maybe. Maybe not. Shoot, forgot to grab that too. Shoot. Sorry. I don't want to do this after. Contrast, contrast. And now I need to go get this. Okay. Sweet. Okay. So next, we're going to set the non-orthogonal contrasts. So for this, we want to look at the averages, and as some main effects might be 0, meaning that it's effective for some people and not for others, and they can cancel out. We want to look at the two groups separately so we can see the effects. So we're going to take our first variable of experience, and we're going to code the baseline group of some experience for 0 for the contrasts. And then for one of the contrasts, we will assign 1 to high and then 1 to none. So contrast 1 compares the high experience to some experience. And then contrast 2 compares the no experience to some experience. So this is our neutral group. That's indicating for high, and that's indicating for none. So then we will bind these for experience, and then we're going to do the same thing for personality. So we're going to code the baseline group of the average personality for 0 for the contrast, and then for one contrast we will assign 1 to the nice category and then 1 to the rude category. So contrast 1 compares the nice personality to the average personality, and then contrast 2 compares the rude personality to average personality. And then we will bind those contrasts as well. Okay, so next we will, oh, and this is important to note, because gender only has 2 levels of male and female, the default contrast will just automatically work for this. But if you have more than 2 levels, you have to set contrast for that variable. I just don't have them in this case. So next we will check to see the contrasts have been set correctly. So we want these to negate, as we already saw before. So yeah, we indicate the data frame and then the variable. So to look at overall main effects and interactions, we have to build the model one predictor at a time from the baseline. So that includes no predictors other than the intercept. And that's indicated by rating, the rating tilde 1. So we want to specify the data frame that we're going to use, and then use the maximum likelihood to estimate the model. So we want the ML. So our data method ML. And these are all of the different variables that we want to measure. So this random part of the model reflects the 2 repeated measures predictors of experience and personality, and then that they are within the variable of participant. So the scores for the levels of the variables can be found within each participant. So to see the overall effect of each main effect interaction, we need to add them into that model that we just created one at a time. So we use the baseline model and add experience after rating. So instead of having the 1, we can add experience. Or we can use the update function, which I did for the rest of the variables. So when we add personality to the model, we can just add the period tilde period, and that means keep the outcome predictors the same as the model before, and then just add the personalities or predictors, so just plus personality. So we're adding that to the dimension that we've already created here. And then you can do the same thing with gender. So each time I am using the old model and replacing it and creating a new one. And then next we're going to add the two-way interactions between the pairs of variables. So there are 3 interactions from the combinations of the main effects. So experience by personality, and then experience by gender, and then personality by gender. So we're doing the same method. So experience by gender, personality by gender. And then experience by personality. And then lastly, we will add the 3-way interaction. So experience by personality by gender. And to compare the models, we're just going to list them in the order that we want them compared. So we're just going to do it in the same way that we just entered the data one by one. So each one of these has each change in the order that we just did all of that. So that command compares the effects of experience to the baseline, so where there was no predictors. And then by adding experience as a predictor, we just increase the degrees of freedom by 2 because the 2 contrasts that we use to code the variable, and this improves the model. So in other words, the experience level of the individual had a significant effect on ratings. We can look at the L ratio and the p-value for reporting, and then we want to see the effect of adding personality into the model, so compared to the previous model that contained only experience. And so the degrees of freedom are increased by 2 again, and by the 2 contrasts used to code the variable, and the fit of the model is improved once again, and the personality of the individual did have a significant effect on attitude. So we can see that by the p-value here, and then reporting as before using that L ratio. And then the next model tells us whether adding gender improved the fit of the model, and it did not, so indicating that gender did not have a significant overall effect, we would report with that L ratio and then the p-value here. So this effect only adds 1 degree of freedom because it was coded with just a single contrast when added to the model. The next model is experience by gender, and that shows that experience by gender interaction was not significant. I think it's indicated by the p-value. And this interaction adds 2 degrees of freedom because it's coded with the 2 contrasts, and gender's only 1, so 2 by 1 is 2. And this significant interaction means that although ratings were affected by whether the person had experience or was of average experience or had no experience, the way in which ratings were affected by experience was not different in male and female raters. So the next model is personality by gender, and it shows that personality and gender interaction was not significant, indicating that the effect of personality differed or did not differ in male and female raters. So the interaction also adds 2 degrees of freedom, as we talked about before. Personality is coded with the 2 contrasts of gender, and gender only has 1, so 2 by 1 is 2 degrees of freedom. And then the next model is experience and personality, and this tells us that there is a significant interaction between experience and personality, indicated by the p-value here. And the interaction adds 4 degrees of freedom because it's made up of the 2 variables, each coded with 2 contrasts. So experience and then personality, so 2 by 2, and that's 4 degrees of freedom. And this interaction term means that if we ignore the gender of the rater, the ratings across different levels of experience was different for nice individuals, average personality individuals, and rude individuals. And then, as we've talked about before, we can say that this also means the ratings across the different levels of personality also was different for people who had high experience, some experience, and no experience. And then finally, our mixed model is the experience by personality by gender. And this is not significant, meaning that the experience and personality interaction was not different in male and female participants. So oh, my computer's gonna die. Oh. I was gonna talk about the different contrasts. Next. Okay. This was crazy. Okay. So, when reporting, we want to look at contrasts and your beta value and your t value and your p value. So, the first contrast that we set was the high versus some experience. We're just going to look down back to these. Shows that highly experienced individuals were rated significantly higher than individuals with those with only some experience. here, and then we have to go down to the p-value. So I guess we'll just look down here. Oh, here. Sorry. And then the second contrast is for experience of none versus some here. And that is also significant. So individuals with some experience were rated significantly higher than individuals with no experience, as we can see from the p-value. And because there are significant interactions involving experience, we shouldn't really interpret the main effect because the higher order interactions supersede it. But we don't have any other interactions past personality and experience. We don't have any interactions with gender or even the three-way interactions. So we only have the interaction of experience of high versus some, and then none versus some, and then nice versus average personality. So lastly, we are going to calculate the effect sizes. So for these, we have to specify the value of t for the effect we want to quantify and the associated degrees of freedom with it. So our first one is experience versus high experience versus some experience, nice versus average personality, and male versus female. So those are t value and our degrees of freedom. And then next is no experience versus some, nice versus average personality, and male versus female. And then lastly, we have experience versus average next, and then, or some experience, and then rude versus average personality, and male versus female. And then lastly, we have no experience versus average experience. Or some, I don't know why I keep average was on everything. So no experience versus some experience, and then rude versus average personality, and male versus female. Okay, bye.